La Jazz Machine. Welcome, Purnell. I want to thank Roger Hara for helping pull all of this together. Roger's a member of our vestry and hosts a couple of fabulous shows on KGNU, a community radio here. Roger, thank you. Purnell let me know, we've been talking about this for months, getting ready for it, and he let me know on Thursday, because you know these jazz musicians, they improvise. He said on Thursday, I'm going to bring a bassist and a lead guitar, and a videographer. So we're improvising here. And then he said, I'm not just gonna give you 4 songs, I'm gonna give you 7. So we're not gonna have a lot of Q&A because we're really here for the real thing, which is the music. But truly, welcome back to St. John's. Purnell and I first met at the burial of a great soul, Carl Pickford, here at the cathedral, and God rest the soul of his wife, Jane, whom we'll bury in January. So it's good to be with you under these circumstances and in this place. He is joined by his bassist, Michael Fitzmaurice, and Michael has played the Wilderness several times, and is a great musician and friend of the Wilderness. And on lead guitar, Von Regensberger. Welcome, gentlemen.
Well, I am no stranger to St. John's Cathedral. First of all, I went to junior high school at Maury 70 years ago. I had black hair at that time. And I also studied, how many of you have heard the name James Bratton? He was the organist here. I took organ lessons from James Bratton starting in 1954. So I am truly no stranger. And you know, I'm never a stranger in God's house. Because I do believe that we are all God's children. And I do want to make a change that you did not know, Dean. We are now the 5 Points ambassadors. We were initially La Jazz Machine. It was Purnell, Steen, and La Jazz Machine. And it's spelled Psalm. PSALM, the acronym. But cities, Denver, sister cities, and Downtown Denver Association 2 years ago sent us to Brest, France. Maybe you don't know this, but Brest is Denver's oldest sister city. It was founded at my alma mater, East High School, in 1948, which the seed was planted through the what were we? Oh, pen pals. And that seed germinated into what has now become Sister Cities International. I'm very proud to say that Denver has 10 sister cities around the world, to include one in Mongolia. Yes. So, that having been said, I can see there are several familiar faces here in this congregation that I see. So we're going to start off with me. You didn't come to hear me, not at all. But, and by the way, this is Brazilian guitar, Dean. Hold that up, please, so that the audience can see it. That is a Brazilian guitar, which is different. If you'll notice, what the bass, okay, those are called the F holes in the bass. There you go. And this is a classical guitar with nylon strings. And I just want to further say that this young gentleman here, Von Regensberger, has recorded in Brazil with some of the leading artists. He has composed almost 250 pieces of Brazilian music, and we're going to release a new CD of his. Well, it's not new. The music was composed 40 years ago, and we're still putting the final touches on that. And since I will share this with you, I've been very humbled because this young man who has written, directed, and produced 4 full-length award-winning films, romantic films here in Denver. His film company is called Gymnopedes. And how many of you have heard of Charles Burrell? Okay. All right. If you have Amazon Prime, Charles Burrell is 104 years old. He is my first cousin. I was at his debut with the Denver Symphony 75 years ago when he made history by being the very first African American in the world to get a contract with a symphony orchestra. That was right there at Auditorium Hall at 14th and Curtis. He's also a great jazz bass player, and he is the last living musician who played at the historic Rossonian Lounge. He's played for, oh good Lord, Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan. He almost played with Bird, that's Charlie Parker, but to tell the truth, Bird was nodded off on drugs, but Charlie played anyway. So we are proud to honor him. Also, we will be doing a Christmas program at 5:30 on Sunday, the day after the Day of Infamy, Sunday, December the 8th, at Dazzle at 5:30. And I have been so humbled because this young man here has initiated the filming on a documentary of my humble life. I am very humbled and just to my knees. So anyway, that having been said, we're going to do something. You like blues? All right. This is an almost blues. Because those of you who have musical training, blues is usually in 8 measures, which we call bars, or 12 or 16. And this one is an 8-bar half blues, but it's fun. It was composed by the late, great Ahmad Jamal. And it starts something like this. I think they can hear me.
Vaughn, Michael, and Purnell, thank you so much.
Yes.
I thought my first question was going to be about the relationship between jazz, spirituals, and classical, but let's get to that later, because where I really want to start is with a question for you, Purnell. Is the Holy Spirit the greatest jazz musician ever because she's always improvising?
Whoa. That's a very probative question. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
Talk about improvisation. You're watching the three of you, this trinity of music here.
Thank you. And I would not be so presumptive as to call it the Holy Trinity. However, you know, that it's almost inexplicable when we play some things. We get transmogrified and transported to different places.
Yeah.
I was totally oblivious of everything else except this is one of the songs that I think I was 9 years old when I first learned. I love Chopin. I've been playing piano 80 years. I started when I was 3 and I just turned 83 on tax day. As a result, you know, that music is in my soul.
Yeah.
It's in his soul, and sometimes when we reach this spiritual congruency, that's it.
Yeah, yeah, amen. Will you say a quick word about this is the time to do it, I think, classical, jazz, and spirituals and the relationship there? We've got more music, so it needs to be brief.
I know. Well, I was in Vienna. I lived in Europe 9 years. And I do want to say something that I got accepted to Juilliard. I always wanted to be a concert pianist. 65 years ago, I got accepted to Juilliard. They saw my picture, and they sent me a very tepid note of dismissal. We're full right now, but when we have an opening, we will send you a message. I'm still waiting for the opening. Went to University of Colorado on scholarship. Warner Imig was the dean of music at the time, 1959. That year, my cousin, Charles Burrell, was called to play with the world-famous San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. Keep that in mind. So when I told Dean Imig and the staff that I wanted to pursue a Bachelor of Science degree in classical performance and pedagogy, his head swung around like that of, what's her name, from The Exorcist, Linda Blair. Yeah, his head spun around and he said, we let him in, there'll never be another. There was my 18-year-old dream of majoring in music. It just went crumbling, crashing. So I never got a degree. I had to study distributive liberal arts. However, I was able to study in Europe. And I was in class in Vienna, and it was a historiography of jazz music. And here Dr. Professor Müller said, if your children know who the classical music, the founder of jazz music is, you don't have to take the class. So we all got very, very full of ourselves. We were all wrong because of Johann Sebastian Bach, because Johann Sebastian Bach did this. Instead of, that's called the dominant seventh chord, which is the foundation chord of jazz. However, you know, hold on, please. That's the prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, the C major prelude, which Gounod thought was so great, and he transposed and created the Bach-Gounod Ave Maria. See, the other Ave Maria, now that precede, well, no, Gounod did this after the other one, which is this. Calvary. So the first one, so you see the relationship. And it was so amazing to me because, Bach composed for everybody, everything. Handel was a guy who was the Duke Ellington of his day. Handel wrote operas, Handel wrote street music. And for those of you who do not know, George Friedrich Handel composed the Messiah for a children's foundling home in Ireland. And the reason why people stand when the Hallelujah chorus is played is because George III, the King of England, was Hanoverian and could not speak English. And he got so excited that he jumped up. Now you do as a king does.
Yeah.
If he genuflects, you genuflex. Okay, but then there are the spirituals, such as, everybody knows when the saints go marching in, right? Do you know that it is an old spiritual? Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay, the first, when the saints go marching in, I want to be in that number. Or when they crown him Lord of all, or when they crown him Lord of all.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, I want to be in that number when we walk around the throne.
And we'll come back to that.
Oh, yes.
And because I've got decent tempo, what do you have next for us?
No. Not right now. Let's do...
Come Sunday.
Yes. Okay, thank you. All right. Come Sunday was composed, it's a part of a suite composed by Duke Ellington in the early 40s. And this was an homage, I cannot say homage, no, I'm not French, but this was an homage to to Negroes at that time who were living in the United States, and he wanted to portray the suffering very academically, very intellectually. So he wrote this piece. It's from the Black, Beige, and Tan suite. And this piece has been adopted by the major Protestant religions of the world into the hymnals. And it simply comes Sunday. I think I can do this.
I don't know if you're still planning on doing Hymn to Freedom, but I thought this might be a good time just to talk quickly. I'd love to hear you say, back in the day, you were the fill-in organist at Holy Redeemer Episcopal Church. You've spent a lot of time playing at St. Thomas Episcopal Church for those services. Say a word, if you will, about liturgy or worship in music.
Well, you know, it's having grown up, and by the way, I am a member of the oldest African-American church in the Rockies. It's the world-renowned Zion Baptist Church, which was founded in 1865. And I joined the musical staff. I was 8. That's when I started playing for the children. And then for the youth, I was 12. The Board of Deacons and the Board of Trustees said, well, he's not a teenager. And somebody said, well, it's only 1 year. And I grew up, it's amazing. I have never known a moment when I wasn't in church. And because my first piano teacher studied with Florence Lamont Hinman, who gave the Lamont School of Music to Denver University, and I went from Catherine Coron to Mrs. Florence Lamont Hinman at 9th and Grant. So anyway, when I started my music training, my teacher, Mrs. Catherine Coron, by the way, historical note, Catherine Coron and Jessie Maxwell were the first 2 African-American students, women especially, who got master's degrees from DU in the 1930s. With those wonderful degrees they had, the racist Denver School Board offered them jobs teaching kindergarten. Mrs. Maxwell decided to hang in there, and she was the very first African-American principal in the city of Denver. She was the principal at Whittier Elementary School at 25th and Downing. And another sad point was that with those skills and with that training, she was denied the opportunity to play the organ in this very sanctuary. I was with her, I was accompanying her, and they made a very flim-flam excuse. Mm-hmm. Thank God those days are behind us. Mm-hmm. Basically, mostly they are. So what Mrs. Coron did with my music lessons when I could play with two-handed, she opened up the Baptist service hymnal, and this was God of our fathers. Okay, and it's in the key of E flat. She made me learn 10 hymns a week. For those of you who are musically trained, in a minimum of 4 keys. So I could play any as long as if it were Protestant, I could play it. I thought, you're going to find God of our fathers in the CME church. You're going to find it in the AME church. You might, and you will certainly find it in the Presbyterian church, the Episcopal church. And I said, so, and I was able to process in my infantile manner that, oh, guess what? It may be in a different page. The color of the hymnal might be different, but it's the same song. Yeah. Ding, Ford had a better idea. The light went on, ding, dong, ding, ding, ding. So it was very simple for me, really, to just, okay, I slid in on the organ bench or piano bench. There would be a different person up there waving. That's what we call directing. Waving, da-da-da-da-da. But it was all the same.
Yeah. I've just been so lucky to for a long time to be with great musicians, and one of my favorite professors in seminary was a musician, and he taught music and liturgy, and he said, no one leaves church humming the sermon. What do you want to do next?
What shall we do? Yes. Okay. Yeah, we'll do Hymn to Freedom. This was composed by one of the greatest, and I use superlatives very, very carefully, but one of the greatest pianists who ever sat down because he had hands about this big. I first saw him in Aspen in 1956 when I was studying, and I'm speaking of the late, great Oscar Peterson. And he composed this ode to Dr. King. It was written in the 60s. So thank you for holding it. I've got to find the music. Because, music, I know a lot of it in my head, but there are some little twists and turns, and I would never want to play it incorrectly. So let me find it here. Oh, I didn't even put it. Oh, yes, here it is. There we go. And this does not move, does it? No. Ooh. I hate that. Believe it or not, the very reason why I saw somebody early on who was playing and the music rack was down, this sounds very peculiar, but that creates a sound barrier between me and the piano. It really does. And I kept watching somebody, and I learned to read horizontally. I can do it. Thank you.
I would love, you mentioned earlier When the Saints, and I know you've got it on the set list for today. Do you mind if we do it? Which is my way of saying,
No, I don't mind if we do.
which is my way of saying, do you mind doing it?
No, never. I never mind doing it. I do want to mention, however, one thing. There is a great Denver connection to Edward Kennedy Ellington, alias the Duke. How many of you have heard of George Morrison? Uh-huh. Right. Well, and it's very interesting. Do you mind telling the story to me, Michael, when we had a conversation?
So I play with an organization called Inside the Orchestra. And basically how it works is we go into elementary schools, and we also do a program for preschoolers, and we take the orchestra and we make a big circle with it, and we face in, we put the audience inside the orchestra. So in a couple of our last programs, Dan Levitt, who's the conductor, also is doing arrangements. He's been arranging tunes by George Morrison, a violinist, a local guy, band leader. The most recent one, we did a lullaby of his. And so this is how I know about George Morrison. It's a fairly recent thing for me, but that's the story.
And you know, this is a very sad thing that the great artists of Denver live in relative obscurity and anonymity. George Morrison, 101 years ago, he's African-American, classically trained violinist. His father was on the Pantages circuit. They came from Missouri. And 90 years ago, George Morrison auditioned with Horace Tourman, trying to get into the antecedent of the Denver Symphony, which is then called the Denver Civic Orchestra. Of course, he couldn't get in because he had a permanent suntan, right? So many people don't know that George Morrison and the late, great Fritz Kreisler, who was a wonderful violinist and composer, were brothers just like this. Fritz Kreisler wrote a piece called Caprice Venoise, okay, the Caprice of Venice, and he dedicated it to George Morrison. So George realized early on that he was going to have to become a jazz musician, so he took his 20-piece jazz band to London. He was under contract to Columbia Records. That's how he was able to get there. And they performed for King George V and Queen Mary, who were the grandfather and grandmother of the recently departed Queen Elizabeth II. Oh, they just took London by storm. When they came back, the vocalist said, "You know what? I'm sick and tired of being the only lady amongst you testosterone-ridden men. I'm leaving." She and her brother left. She was from Kansas. They went to Los Angeles, 1924-25. She started doing club gigs. She started doing comedy work. And 85 years ago, she changed the movie industry because she won an Oscar for portraying Mammy in Gone with the Wind. I'm speaking of the immortal Hattie McDaniel, who went to East High School in 1908 and 1909, and she was the first cousin to George Morrison. George Morrison lives at 25, well, the family house is at 2558 Gilpin, right on the southeast corner, excuse me, of 26th and Gilpin. 1932, George Morrison's home was always open. There was always a pot on somewhere because the Negro musicians could not get public accommodations. As late as 1965, the late, great, world-famous Nat King Cole performed here in Denver and could not, I will repeat this so you can hear this, could not stay at the downtown Hilton. That is a sin before God. It really is. So George Morrison, he had, an open house for the musicians. And in 1932, Duke Ellington was passing through town. And we have this on one of the early 5 Points documentary films. As an historical note, if you want to know more about Denver, please go to and visit the greatest library, I'm going to use that, and research institution between Chicago and Los Angeles, and I mean the Blair Caldwell Library and Research Museum, which was hand-built with private funds by I will use this superlative, by the greatest mayor in Denver's history. I'm speaking of Wellington Eugene Webb. Wilma Jean, his wife, we grew up together. People don't know this. They went out and canvassed people. That wonderful edifice is the largest of all of these so-called, quote, branch libraries. It's 3 stories tall, a half a block long. They went out, and at the dedication, Wellington said, I can't claim it. He said, Wilma is the one who went out and canvassed the community and got the first $25 million to construct that wonderful museum. Please go. It is on this registry. Oh, and also, I must mention this. I can't do it. My heart would not let me go and not do it. I attended a great dedication service. It was Thursday. Fire station number 3. Okay, the pride of the Points, 25th in Washington, is the oldest continuous fire station in use. It was built in 1892 by the then mayor of Denver with a special designation that this was the all-Negro fire company. It has been placed on the National Registry of Historic Places. So it's now mentioned, so if you come to Denver, it's one of the sites to see. Well, 1932, Duke Ellington was here, and he went down in the basement, and he came back up and he said, Morrison, I need some paper, meaning notation, music notation paper. And the next morning he came up and he wrote a song, the dedication of which reads, to my dear friend, Willa Mae Morrison. Sophisticated Lady was composed at 2558 Gilpin in 1932. That's the connection Duke Ellington we have with Duke Ellington. So I'm very proud. I love the history, and I want to make sure that the history does not end up in a moth-eaten book stored in somebody's attic. But we will do, before we do Saints, I do want to do a piece that I took out, and are there any attorneys in the room? Well, no, I guess there's no statute of limitations. I took out 4 parking meters about 35 years ago. I'll do this solo very quickly. I did. I heard this piece of music, and it did the same thing. It got into my soul, and I'm dedicating this to all our loved ones who have passed on. It was composed by the late, great Marion McPartland. And this is how the jazz music is so special, because this piece, Vaughn, how would you describe it? In what form would it be? A rubato ballad, baby, yeah, about... en français, une ballade, n'est-ce pas? Oui? Okay, and it's simply entitled Twilight World.